Hi, I'm Randy Patterson, and this is Psychology Salon, a channel about psychological issues. If you like this kind of thing, click subscribe below. This is a post about young adults stuck at the transition between adolescent dependence and adult independence and having difficulty seizing the reins of their own adult life. We often call this failure to launch, though I prefer the term delayed transition to adulthood because for most, it's a delay, not an outright failure. And today I'm going to ask how severe this problem is. Delayed transition to adulthood is not a recognized mental disorder, and I'm okay with that. I prefer to think of it as simply one way to live your life and one that unfortunately tends to have unpleasant consequences. I've never liked the fact that we keep inventing more and more mental disorders so that more and more of us are supposedly mentally ill. I mean, fine if that helps, but I'm not sure it does. Personally, I find diagnosis less and less helpful in my work, although I do find it useful some of the time. I tend to think of most of the challenges that clients bring to our clinic as problems in living, not as mental illnesses. Anyway, the boys and girls' own giant book of mental troubles is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM, and it's been through multiple versions. The current one is version 5, hence DSM-5. But I'm going to talk about something from version 4, the previous one. They got rid of it in version 5, mostly, even though I think it was useful. They asked a question. Look, the book includes all different kinds of problems, from caffeine intoxication to autism to depression. Hundreds of different ways that our minds can have problems. But ultimately, the big question is, how does this affect your life? Is it a big deal or not? Within each disorder, there are various levels of severity. If you have OCD, for example, does that mean that you spend an extra few minutes checking the locks, or does that mean you can't get out of the house at all? Now, partly this is handled by the criteria for each disorder, most of which say that it doesn't actually count as a disorder unless it fouls up your life at least somewhat. If you're afraid of fish and you live in the desert, who cares? But even if you do cross that threshold, there's a lot of room. It could get in your way a fair bit or maybe completely. And then try to compare across problems that may be very different. Who's worse off? Someone with high-functioning autism or someone with trichotillomania? Could be either. Depends how it goes with the particular person. So the developers of DSM-4 said, look, what we really care about is people's lives. So let's forget about all these distinctions that we're making for 2 minutes anyway, and create one simple scale that asks essentially, how you doing? We'll do the diagnosis, but then we'll ask, how's this person doing overall, regardless of what they have, or even if they don't really have a disorder at all. And we'll sum it up in one number, from 1 to 100, not from 0. 0 means we don't know. So 1 to 100. And we'll call it the Global Assessment of Functioning, or GAF. And it won't tell us much about the particulars, but it will help us identify the person's level of ability or disability. Now, if you look at this thing, most of us don't score 100, but we do tend to cluster up toward the top. There's a couple of recurrent features in the criteria: suicidality, the ability to do minimal personal hygiene, the ability to communicate, the presence of delusions or hallucinations, the ability to work or attend school, the ability to maintain personal relationships, the ability to perceive something close to reality, the ability to tolerate challenges in social, occupational, or school functioning, and general life satisfaction. Now, the Global Assessment of Functioning is available online for you to look at if you want, so I'm not going to go over every bit of it in detail. Suffice to say that there are some general guidelines to what a score of 1 to 10 looks like, and 11 to 20, and 21 to 30, and all the way up to 91 to 100. Tell you what, I'll give you the 91 to 100 description to give you an idea. Superior functioning in a wide range of activities. Life's problems never seem to get out of hand. Is sought out by others because of his or her many positive qualities. No symptoms. Told you, doesn't fit most of us. But generally, people do tend to cluster closer to the top end than the bottom. Okay. In the course of my career, I've seen people who have met diagnostic criteria for a wide range of the problems listed in the DSM. And I've made estimates of the GAF levels for many of them, social anxiety, let's say, and severe enough that it meets the threshold so that we can call it social anxiety disorder, if we really want to do that. Personally, I don't really see the advantage of making that line call a lot of the time, but we can do it if need be. So, what are they like? Well, most people with social anxiety disorder are able to work. Most of them have at least some friendships. Many of them are in a long-term relationship, like a marriage. They function within their family. Some of them are in school. There are a lot of situations that bother them, and they may avoid situations where they have to interact with a lot of people. But they can care for themselves. They can manage their own finances. They don't need a full-time caregiver to fulfill their basic needs. And they really do have lives outside the home. Okay, what about adult ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or high-functioning autism, or major depressive disorder, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or generalized anxiety disorder, or hypochondriasis, or obsessive-compulsive disorder? Mostly the same is true. Some of those problems are associated with higher or lower GAF scores than others, but for the most part, people still have the ability to care for themselves, manage their own lives, live independently, and function to at least some degree in a real-life social world or an occupational setting. And maybe you can see where this is going, because clinicians hear about failure to launch, or hikikomori, the Japanese term for a particularly severe version of this, or delayed transition to adulthood, and they know it's not a formal diagnostic category. And when you look at the person's circumstances, the barriers aren't obvious. Many people in this situation could go a long way toward resolving it quite quickly if they just turned off the computer, got out of the house, began doing their own shopping, took a more active role and applied for some entry-level jobs. Unlike some clients with obvious limiting physical disabilities, the doors for people with this problem look like they're all sitting wide open, at least at first glance. So clinicians wonder, is this really such a big deal? Maybe we should be able to work it through in a couple of sessions. No. When I'm teaching clinicians about providing therapy for these young adults, I say it's going to take a fair bit of time. And one of the things that I do is I point to the GAF, even though supposedly we don't use it anymore. Look at where your young adult sits on this scale. In most cases, it's somewhere in the 30s, sometimes the 20s, sometimes the 40s. Regardless, that's lower than most of the people you see who have clinical depression or OCD or PTSD or high-functioning autism or ADHD or anger control problems or body dysmorphic disorder or eating disorder or chronic pain or a spinal cord injury or almost any of the problems we typically see in outpatient practice. I tell them this difficulty seizing control of your own life and transitioning out of childhood is one of the most disabled conditions you're going to see in your office. Now, you'll notice I used a strange word there. I said disabled conditions, not disabling conditions. What I mean is that at present, these individuals have severely restricted lives compared to most people, even compared to most people who present for psychological care. That's the nature of the problem. But the problem itself is not disabling. Unlike, say, quadriplegia, having the problem does not in itself prevent a person from taking on a full range of activity. Their body is intact, their intellect is there, they can get out of the house, they are typically employable to at least some degree, they can learn financial self-management, they have the intellectual capacity to do so, they can learn cooking and shopping and so on. When we say that a person fits the description of failure to launch, we don't mean that they can't do any of these things. We mean that they can do them, but they have not. In other words, the door is open, and for some reason they haven't walked through it. If they do not have the ability, for example, if they lack the intellectual function to figure out bank accounts or working an oven, then we think of that disability as the problem. It's not the failure to launch that's the problem, it's that's the issue. Failure to launch is about a rocket that can fly, but doesn't. So what this means is that we're working with inherent abilities that remain untapped. So really, failure to launch is quite an optimistic situation. We don't have to give this person strength and ability out of thin air. We work instead to help them find and use the ability that they already have and don't realize it. We can help them identify and reach significant life goals because the potential is there. Their GAF score can rise beyond where they start from. And more importantly, they can live more of the life that they themselves decide they want. This is not about making them conform and become good little worker bees for the economy. This is about helping them become fully functioning, autonomous adults who can decide for themselves what they want. But in answer to our original question, is this really a significant problem? Yes, it is. And it gets more significant and more entrenched the longer it goes on. It's vitally important to help young adults develop the skills they need to function without parental training wheels. And it can be done. There are other videos on this channel on the subject of failure to launch or delayed transition to adulthood. Click the subscribe button for more. Some of these concern parenting, and for parents who find themselves in this situation, I have an online course, The Parent Trap, available from my education site here. For young adults themselves, I have a book, How to Be Miserable in Your 20s, 40 Strategies to Fail at Adulting, that takes a sort of backhanded look at how to seize hold of your own adulthood. Available from all major online booksellers. Thank you for watching.